Hey neighbors, Kevin here with the etrailer, and today we're going to be showing you how to install the Firestone Ride-Rite air helper springs here in our 2024 Ford F-250. F-250 is a super popular work truck, and it's also popular for those just hauling their RV. Now if you're planning on doing both and you know that you're going to be dealing with different weight trailers and you need that range so that you can go back and forth without really destroying your unloaded ride quality, that's where you're going to want to start looking into some air springs, because they're going to allow you to adjust the PSI to handle those real heavy loads when you're at work, and then maybe that smaller load when you're hauling just maybe the boat, maybe you got some jet skis that are real lightweight, or maybe you just have a small trailer that you want to pull behind when you're taking the kids out camping. So a lot of neighbors come to us with the issue of sag anytime they're towing their trailer, but sag isn't going to be the only issue that you're dealing with in that case. Typically, when you are starting to lower down that rear end, the front end is going to start to lift up. And what happens with that is you start losing braking power and steering, which are pretty much the two most important things when you're towing something or driving around. As you start placing more weight on that rear suspension, it's going to compress it down, and it's going to wear on that suspension and those brakes and your tires at the back a whole lot more than it is on the front. The majority of your braking power is at the front as well, so cutting out that just isn't going to be a good recipe for a good time. Going along with that, there's also the loss of your visibility, because now instead of our headlights facing the road, they're facing the vehicle in front of us. So we're just adding safety hazard after safety hazard, as well as now more maintenance costs, because now my rear tires are wearing out before my front ones are. And if you don't have a good mechanic making sure that you're rotating your tires properly, now you have an even bigger cost just because of something as simple as sag in the back and a lift in the front. So taking a closer look at our air spring, this is going to be a double convoluted bellow, and on top of that we're going to have two plates, and those are going to be crimped on. These aren't just held on with a hose clamp like some other brands do, which can end up having an issue if you're going over any kind of curb, anything where your axle is going to drop. If you don't have that crimped on there, there's a good chance that when that axle drops, it's just going to tear your bag right apart. So Firestone having that and giving you a little bit more sturdiness, so that way maybe you're at the mechanic and they're lifting your vehicle up and not by the axle, they're lifting it by the frame just so that they can do an oil change, something like that. You're not going to tear your bags up because you have a little bit of play there where you can have that kind of safeguarded. Now these do go from 0 PSI up to 100 PSI, but you really want to keep these at a minimum of 5 PSI just because as your suspension kind of compresses and rebounds back up, that could end up tearing up the bag if there's no air pressure in here at all. So at that 5 PSI, you won't really notice a huge difference in your ride quality when you're unloaded either. So it's not going to give you that rough, harsh ride like a lot of other people are pretty much going to be expecting with an air spring. Now these do have a 5,000 pound capacity, but that does not always mean that you have 5,000 pounds of payload capacity with your vehicle. Even though the F-250 does have a higher capacity, you are still going to want to make sure that you verify with your owner's manual just what that capacity is and go with whichever is lower rated so that you don't damage your vehicle. As far as installation goes, this one is definitely a lot easier than most that I've seen. There really isn't a lot in the way that we have to remove. You're not dropping the exhaust, you're not pulling out your heat shield, you're not taking off a bunch of wiring harnesses or popping out the brake lines, anything like that. So this one can be done at home pretty easily, but there are some tools that you might not have if you aren't really a mechanic or a do-it-yourself kind of guy. So if that is the case, please use our dealer locator and you can find a shop near you to get it done. If this is something you are planning on doing yourself, stay tuned and we will show you how to do it at home up next with our install. To begin our install, I already lowered our spare tire and put that off the side so that we have more room to work. Next, we're going to remove our factory jounce bumper. It's going to have two nuts right here we're going to take off, and I'm going to be using a 15mm socket. Once we have those two nuts out, we can drop this down, and we're going to want to grab either a pry bar or a flathead screwdriver. Next, we'll remove these factory bolts and their retention clips. To do that, you'll take your flathead screwdriver and you'll press on the tab that's pressing against the bolt head, and that'll loosen it out. You can just pop it right out. Next, we're going to get our thread plate ready, and to do that, we're going to need our red zip ties. Now, if you look at the thread plate, there's going to be one flat end and one end where it has weld nuts. The weld nuts are going to be facing up inside of our frame, and in the way that they show it in the diagram for the putting these in, it's a little goofy. I tried doing it before, and it didn't really work out good for me. It kind of had it spaced a little bit too far away, so what I like to do is put this through the square portion and then have the end of our zip tie coming out through that triangle portion right here. So push it in, we'll get our zip tie nice and tight. And now when we line it up, this is going to line up with the hole that's going to be in our top bracket, and that'll line up so that we can slide our bolts into place. We'll just do that on both sides. So to show what I was talking about, I have the upper bracket right here, and you can see this is where our zip tie is going to slip through, and this is where our weld nut is going to be. So if you have that zip tie over in that square hole, it's not going to fit right, and you're going to be fighting it. It's going to be a bit of a nightmare. So make sure you do it the way I just showed you, and then when you slide it in, now our hole is going to line up with our weld nuts. Next we'll fish our thread plate in. I'm going to use that zip tie to make sure I still have hold of it. May have to wiggle it around a bit just to get it right. But we can line that up, and we're going to have those holes kind of line up with this little smaller section here, and we can get our top bracket in place. Now we can slip our zip ties through the smaller hole. Push it up, and we just need to align one of them to start with. We'll get a couple threads in, and that'll help hold up the bracket while we get the other one started as well. And this is going to be the black flathead 2.5-inch long bolts. We'll push those in through our weld nut. Like I said, just get one started. We can come over to the other side and do the same thing. Now we can just tighten these down, and once you have them snug, you don't have to fully torque them down just yet. You'll want to come back with a pair of cutters, and we'll just cut off any excess zip tie that we have hanging down past the bracket. As you are tightening this down, make sure you kind of press up on this. We want to keep this nice and flat up against the frame rail. Next, we're going to get our lower frame bracket and our lower spring bracket ready to go. And to do that, you're going to want to use those 1-inch long flathead screws. We'll put that through this lower hole right here, and then that's going to slip into this hole on our spring bracket. And we'll loosely tighten that down with a flange nut. Next, we're going to grab one more of those 1-inch long flathead bolts, and we're just going to thread that into our air spring. And once again, we're just using this for fitment guidance. We're not going to fully tighten this down just yet, because you're going to have to pull it right back off. Now we can pop our air spring and lower bracket assembly into place. We want this to sit up against that jounce stop here that's on our spring stack, and then also have the bracket sitting up against the spring stack. And then we're going to align the air fitting and that bolt that's right next to it up with the two holes that are on our upper bracket. I'm going to make sure that that's fully in, and to do so you are going to have to pop off that little cap. We'll get that kind of in, keep the bracket up against the frame as best, or the spring stack as best we can. Then you're going to want to take a marker, and you're going to mark on the bag itself. I kind of like to do it right here on the bracket as well. I'm going to go right in between where these two bolts are going to sit. And this is just so that we have it kind of marked out, ready to go when we go to put the air spring back in later on, so that our holes are matching up. We don't have to sit there and kind of struggle. Now that we have this marked, we can remove our air spring again. We're going to add on some more bracket pieces to our lower bracket and get this all snug down. Next, we're going to take our leaf spring bracket and our 6-inch carriage bolts. There's going to be 4 of these going in. I find it a lot easier if you put the rear side in first and then slide in the front side. This little tab right here, we want that sitting right in between our U-bolts on our truck. So with that kind of loosely in place, I'll throw a flange nut on real quick. That'll kind of help hold us up, and we can get on the other side and put the other 2 bolts in. If you do go ahead and not put those 2 bolts in on the back side, you are going to have a bit of a struggle on your hands just because the brakes are right in the way. So I highly recommend putting those in first and then moving over to the front where there's plenty of room and sliding your other 2 carriage bolts in. So next step, I'm going to snug down these just a little bit more, and the whole point of this is we're going to try and get this sitting nice and perfect and snug up against our jounce bracket support. Now, if we didn't have that jounce bracket support, there are going to be some different steps. After this, you would have to install one of these brackets right here, and you might also need another support bracket, which is included with your kit, so it makes it a little bit easier. But since we aren't doing that install, what you would have to do is end up just putting 2 bolts on each side of this bracket, and that would mount up along with these tabs on both sides. With ours today, we don't really need it, and that's going to save us a whole lot of hassle because we also have all these lines sitting right in our way. So as we snug these down, we want to make sure we're pressing it up against our U-bolts, and we want to go evenly. And we're not fully tightening this yet, we're just getting it snug. So that way we can take some measurements and see if we need to have a spacer between our lower and upper bracket to make our air spring fit. So I'm going to keep working my way back and forth, and I'm also going to keep making sure that we're sitting nice and flush up against the leaf spring stack. Now we're going to measure between our lower and upper bracket to see if we need a spacer, because our neighbor does have the tremor package, so he does have a little bit of a lift. We're looking at right at 8.5 inches. If you measure and you get 5.5 to 6.5 inches, you don't need the spacer that's included with the kit. If you do end up measuring 6.5 to 7 3/4, then you're going to need the included spacer. Anything over that 7 3/4, you're going to end up having to get a separate spacer, which you can also order here at etrailer. For our install today, we are going to be using a 2-inch spacer. To attach that, we're first going to put it on the bottom of our air spring. Now I give you a little bit of hardware here. So we're going to have a black flathead bolt, and we're going to use that to attach our bracket or our spacer up to our lower bracket. And then we're going to use these hex heads along with a split lock washer to connect to our air spring. So on the inside, you can see in that there's a few different holes. So I'm going to start with the center. If we need to adjust later on, once we have it in place, we might have to pull this back out and kind of move things around just to make sure that everything's kind of matching up nice and tight. But we'll drop that in, get that started. And I'm going to just put my finger on the head of that bolt, and then I'm just going to spin this around to help kind of tighten it up a little bit easier once we get it started. And then I'm going to tighten it just a bit more, and we can go test fit this in place. Now I did have to loosen this up just slightly because the jounce bumper bracket that's sitting right here kind of blocks us from getting our bolt in from the bottom. With that little black bolt, we are also going to use some Loctite just to make sure we don't have any kind of slippage later on. And then I am going to slip my air spring back up into place, and you can use that yellow mark or any kind of mark that you made on it to help kind of guide you to make sure that you're turning this the correct way. Slip that up, and then we'll slip our bolt in here. I may have to kind of play around with this just a bit. Find that sweet spot. I get a couple threads going, and then I'm going to compress my air spring just a bit more so I can fully lift that up into place. Using a 7/32 hex socket, I'm going to lift up, and I can use the pressure of the air spring kind of coming back to tighten this down. Now, like I was saying earlier, we are going to have to kind of play with this because our jounce bumper is slightly in the way here. So I might have to compress this one more time and kind of angle it before we get too tight, just so we can slip past that. There we go. And then we can push this back into place. So you see how we can kind of spin this still? That means we're not fully seated, so we need to make sure that we are lining that up, and that's where that paint line or marker line kind of comes into play here. Put that back in. This little guy, this nub right here, needs to make sure it's going right into that space. So we may also need to kind of play with our brackets, so that's why they tell you to keep it loose still. So I'm going to make sure that this is pretty much perpendicular and that little nub is right in our bracket hole. Once it is, then we can kind of come back and start tightening some things down. So when we're lining this up, we want to make sure that our airline fitting is kind of out towards the front of our vehicle. And that little nub is going to seat into one of those smaller holes behind it. If you're not getting it just right, you might need to kind of play around with it a bit more. Now that I got it kind of up in there, I can see I'm matching up good. And that's where we can come back and start tightening up the rest of our hardware here and getting this seated properly. So just to show you this out here where it's easier, we're going to be taking our air fitting, which is going to be little brass guys. We don't want to go with the ones that have the straighter valve just yet. That's going to be for airlines. And we're going to slip this up into our upper bracket like we have already. And then we would have this nylock nut, and we would use that to fully tighten it down. And then we would thread in our airline fitting. So we'll get that up in place with the one we already have installed. Well, I'll start with that nylock nut, that just hand tight, and then we can come back with our wrench. I'm using a 24mm socket. Now we can torque this down. The specifications listed in your manual. It's really not much, so you're going to be right past hand tight anyway. So it should be pretty easy. You might find it's a little difficult just getting the right torque wrench for that. You're probably going to need a 1/2 inch, unless you can find a 3/8 drive for a 24mm socket. Now we're going to take our airline fitting. That's going to, you can see the red Loctite on it. We're going to go until that red Loctite's gone. We want that all encased in our threads here. Now on our passenger side, we are going to have a heat shield, and before we can put that nylock nut on, we are going to need to slip this in place first. Now I already have my air spring up in place. I've got the bracket mounted to our spacer already. So this is just kind of loose up top. What I'm going to do is I'm going to compress it down. I'm going to slip that on over. And then we can pop it right back into place. And we're going to position that so it kind of blocks the air spring from that exhaust. So that exhaust is super hot and can end up damaging your air spring. For our next part, we are going to have these little brackets right here, and these are going to have an opening in them. We're going to slide those two openings together to make a M shape, just like that. And then these are going to sit below our axle, and we're going to have, actually just like this. So it'll kind of butt up against the axle, so if my hand was that, it would butt up right like that. We want that nice and snug. We're going to have the 3-inch carriage bolt come through on the bottom. And then from our upper brackets, we're going to have the long carriage bolts come down, and we'll tighten all that up with some flange nuts. All right, we're gonna have 2 sets of holes. The one I'm going in right now is the wrong one. We need to be on the one closest to our leaf spring pack, and then also there's a couple different like cutouts in that are gonna match up to the carriage bolt head, and you can use that to get yourself closer to the axle tube. We want to be as close as we can to the axle tube and to our spring pack as we can be. And then we can get our next bracket ready. So I've already got the bolt through on the lower end. I'm going to use a flange nut to kind of help hold myself together here real quick. Just get a couple threads going. And we can throw the flange nuts on our longer carriage bolts. That'll help hold these brackets up, and then we can start tightening them down. I'm going to do it nice and evenly because I want this to sit super tight up against that axle tube. So I'll kind of work my way back and forth, tightening it so that everything kind of comes together evenly. Now that we have this in place, you can kind of see what I was talking about. I have that bend in the bracket right up against our axle on both sides. So it's a painful process of just sitting here and slowly tightening everything down, but we got that perfect. Now we can go around to all of our fasteners and just fully tighten them down. Now we have all of our hardware fastened down on our driver's side. We're going to go over to our passenger side and we will get all of that done exactly the same way as we did over on the driver's side. The only difference is you're going to also have a heat shield that you're going to need to put on first, and that will pop right up in there, and we're going to just position that so it's at the closest point to our exhaust to help kind of shield that air spring so it's not getting overheated. With all of our hardware tightened down, we'll now grab our airline tube. What you're going to want to do is put both ends together, and you can pull it straight. You might want an extra set of hands because it is a little bit to kind of try and get this, just because this airline tubing is really hard and it's kind of already wound up, so it really wants to retain its shape. And then once we find that, the other end of it, right, which would be the middle of it, is going to be where we cut so that we have two even length airlines. Now while you're doing this, you want to make sure that you are getting a 90-degree cut. You want to use a nice sharp razor blade. You don't want to have a dull one. You don't want to have any little burrs or any kind of issues with your cut. You want to make sure it's nice and clean and 90 degrees. If it's off a little bit, say we cut this at an angle like that, or maybe we had some scrapes on there. Now this isn't going to seat correctly in our airline fitting, and then we're going to have a bunch of leaks. So I want to make sure a nice 90-degree cut. Now's a good time to really kind of picture where you're going to have everything sit. When you're in the 250 and 350 range, that's where you're going to have this larger hitch, and you got the opening here. Kind of that just makes it super easy to tuck your airlines out of the way, but still have access to those Schrader valves, so that way you can fill it up or lower the PSI if you need to. Now when you're routing these, you're going to want to make sure that you're staying away from any kind of moving component or anything that's going to generate heat. So let's go ahead and show you how we ran it. So with our airline in place on our driver's side, I'm going to show you how to press in the tube. So we're just pressing straight down in there. And what's going to happen is there's little teeth inside of our fitting, and they're going to bite down on it. So when we pull on it, it's not going to want to come out. Now if you ever did need to take this out, like as you can see right here, I have a whole bunch of it kind of just bundled up. If there's ever an issue, maybe we got a leak here, we need to cut some off, we got some excess here that we can always pull from. And then what we'll do is you can use like a 1/4 inch open-ended wrench, and you can press down on this little circle ring here, and that's going to help release those teeth, and then you can pull out. But tracing this back, we have a wire loom that's running along our frame rail, so I pretty much just stuck to it because that also kept us away from our shock and the rest of our suspension. If you keep following it up, we're going to come over towards the back, and then I looped it into the mounting bracket for the trailer hitch and just have it kind of coming up, because in that opening it comes right up over our cross tube, and that's where we're going to end up putting our Schrader valves. And from here you can also see our passenger side. So I just stuck with the wire looms that are already in place, so that way I know I'm going to clear that spare tire when it's up in place. So that comes over, we cut through the hitch again, and then I come up on top of the frame rail over here so I can stay away from the exhaust. So I have it kind of running up, and at this point right here I used one of those thermal shields just because there's a little bit of gap here. Not too bad to where I'd really be worried about it, but best to throw it on anyway. And then I did the same thing. I kind of wound it all up, zip tied it, and then we have it already up on our bag, and I used another thermal shield just because this is really the closest spot to our exhaust. So I want to make sure I had it nice and protected. So back at our trailer hitch where we're going to mount our mount for the valves, I'm also going to slip in my zip ties. I'm going to have those kind of sit on the back end of this so that they're out of the way for the airlines to come through, but also kind of hidden behind everything so it looks nice and clean. We'll put this up, and honestly you could really just kind of put it at the back of the hitch. Push it up, we'll get that one started. Switch over this guy. I think if you look a little closer right here, I'm going to put it so it's tight down here. That way I can easily just cut that right off. We'll get that nice and tight. Looking at our Schrader valves, it's going to come just like this guy here. I've already taken off that nut. We're going to end up using a couple of our washers, and what we'll do is I'm going to put this on first. I'll slide this into my mounting bracket, and then I'm going to come back with another washer and then that nut, and that's going to help kind of spread out that weight so we're not breaking the bracket if we start tightening this down too much, especially because it's plastic. And then on the end of that would be our cap. So let's get this in place. And same thing as what we did on the airbags. We're gonna just press in nice and tight with that. Make sure we got a nice, good bite. And right now I have my passenger side airline. I'm gonna put that on the passenger side here. That way there's no confusion. And actually I messed up. I wanna throw my washer on there first. Let's pull that down. Pop that washer on. Through. And then we're just going to do the same thing with the driver's side. Using a 1/2-inch socket, I'm just going to finish tightening this down. You don't need to go super tight. We're just trying to make sure that it's held in place. Now that that's in place, we can put a little bit of air in here, and then we can use some soapy water and check each connection, make sure that there's no leaks. Now we'll go ahead and fill up our airbag up to 50 PSI, just to test for leaks. There we go. Now we take some soapy water, spray it on there, see if there any air bubbles start to form, then we know we have a leak. Looking pretty good, not seeing any air bubbles come out right here, so we'll go on to our next connection. Now that we've checked it, we found no leaks. That'll do it for the installation portion here. If you do end up finding some leaks, that is going to be where you need to use that 1/4-inch wrench, kind of press down on the fitting, and then you can pull the airline out, give it a nice clean new cut, and then try it again. Well, I think that'll about do it for today's installation of the Firestone Ride-Rite air helper springs here in our 2024 Ford F-250. My name's Kevin, and if this video didn't help you, please feel free to reach out to us via our Ask the Experts link, a comment on this video, or a phone call to our customer service department, and we'd be happy to help you out finding the correct fit for your journey.